Great Responsibility, Chapter 17, Falling in the Black. MJ had suggested to Piper that she bring the new kids along to movie night. Harry had seemed to be feeling a bit left out. In hindsight, it hadn't been such a great idea, but him turning movie night into a raging party was a worse idea. MJ waved as she spotted Piper coming into the penthouse. She and her new friends fought their way into the crowd. "Hey, Piper, some party, huh?" Piper frowned. "I thought we were just going to be watching movies." MJ frowned and ducked as Flash threw a football to one of his friends. "Apparently, we're watching half the school party down at Harry's instead." Harry popped up next to MJ, a slightly forced smile on his face.
"The whole school, actually. Except for the ones who weren't invited."
Harry glared pointedly at Sam, Ava, Danny, and Luke. Sam was stuffing his face with nachos. Piper frowned deeply. "I invited them, Harry. I thought if everyone got to know each other, things would be cool." Harry looked away slightly. Piper reached out and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Harry, I'm trying here." He shrugged off her hand.
"I don't need new friends. As you can see, I've got plenty."
Harry walked away into the crowd of people, all of whom were adoring him and cheering and chanting his name. Piper felt tears sting her eyes. "Guess that means you don't need me, either," she muttered and felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up into Eddie's face.
"You okay, Pipes?"
Piper was about to reply when her spidey sense went crazy. It was even worse than when the Malibu house had been attacked, worse than when the Frightful Four attacked. Her head spun and her hand flew to it. Eddie's eyes grew concerned. "Sorry, I need some fresh air." She rushed past him and out onto the balcony. It was nearly empty, except for Flash, who appeared to be standing at the edge of the balcony looking upset. He spotted Piper and swiped at his eyes. Piper's spider sense was still ringing. It was starting to hurt her head. It felt like a high-pitched whistle ringing through her brain.
"Parker, what are you doing out here?"
Piper couldn't reply. Her head was ringing too much.
"Parker."
Flash sounded almost concerned. Then there was a squelching noise, and they both looked around and spotted a slimy thing crawling up the side of the building. It hissed and grew, reaching out towards them. Flash pushed her in front of him.
"Take the nerd! She's bite-sized!"
The creature hissed loudly, and Piper dove to the side, expecting Flash to do the same. The quarterback was a bit slower than she was. The black mass of ooze wrapped around Flash as he screamed. His scream turned into a shrieking hiss as he snarled at Piper. She jumped, avoiding a stretched-out arm that tried to snatch her up. The thing that had been Flash snarled again, smashing enlarged fists down into the deck. The whole thing shook, and the sounds of the party stopped. Piper straightened back up as the thing hissed again and lunged. She tried to dodge, but it swung out at her, catching her in the side and sending her flying through a window back into the party. She landed hard, pieces of shattered glass cutting into her hands as she tried to pull herself up. The thing crawled into the room, lumbering and hissing as it went. One of the boys in the party helped Piper to her feet. The thing that had been Flash roared, tendrils reaching up and shattering the lights. Screams filled the room, and in the confusion, Piper managed to slip off into the bathroom and change into her spare costume. She always kept one on her, usually hidden in a secret compartment in her backpack. She slipped back out into the living room, climbing up the wall. She heard Harry calling out for Piper. For her. Eddie seemed to have been swept off in the crowd of panicking teens. "I'm right behind you, go!" The last guest, save MJ, who was standing by the doors with Harry, ran out, pausing to give Harry her number. Ava pushed MJ out the door, and Luke and Danny grabbed Harry and dragged him bodily out of the apartment, despite his protests. Piper leapt down from the wall, landing in front of the creature. "I'll only say this once. Let the jock go, Slimy." The creature hissed and swung its arms out at Spidey, who dodged, leaping upwards, avoiding the snake-like tendrils by inches.
"I think it likes you, Webs."
Nova floated in through the window and stood next to Spider-Girl. The thing hissed and swung at Nova instead. "I think it likes you better, Buckethead." Nova rolled his eyes and shoved Spidey back a bit.
I got this.
Neither of them noticed the black sludge detaching itself from Flash until it was lunging for Nova. He tried to shoot at it, but missed, and screamed as it wrapped around him. For a moment, he hung in the air, hands glowing, black ooze still shifting. Then the thing that had been Nova hissed and snarled at her, and Spider-Girl leapt aside as enlarged glowing fists swung at her. The heck did I ever do to you? I mean, I kind of get Nova being mad at me because he thinks I took his place as leader of the team, but it sounded like there was an issue with him being leader anyway. Piper dodged another blow and leapt out of the window. The thing that had been Nova followed. Seriously, this might normally be fun. Nova could use a good takedown in the ego department, but seriously, this way, it's just not fair. She was trying to buy time. She needed to figure out what this thing was. Not a robot this time. Definitely organic. Jumping from host to host. A symbiote, then. She leapt up the wall, shooting a line and swinging up to the roof. It followed her, like she'd guessed it would. It seemed fixated, but she had no idea why. The others burst out onto the roof as Nova, actually him this time, screamed, "Get it off me!" He bent double, fighting the symbiote that was trying to get a hold of him again. White Tiger turned to Spider-Girl. "How do we get that thing off him without hurting Nova?" Spidey shrugged. "My irresistible comedic banter has had no effect. That's all I got." Piper couldn't see Ava's face, but she could practically hear the condescending eyebrow raise. Luke rolled his eyes and raced forward. "Kidding! Don't touch it! It'll stick to you!" Luke yanked the goo off of Nova.
Not if you touch it hard enough.
He tried to shake off the goo, punch it, but it crept up his arms. Danny cried out, watching his best friend engulfed in the goop. The now-possessed Power Man ripped a large metal structure off the roof. Piper had to think on her feet, a symbiotic relationship, seeming to attach to the host via contact, creating a nearly parasitic bond. Easiest way to get it off was to break the bond. Looked like the electrowebs were going to come in handy after all. All right, Slimy, I gave you your chance. Time to take you down. Piper snapped her wrist forward, shooting a web at Power Man. It struck him right in the chest, and she pressed her wrist backwards just a touch more, activating the electroweb function. Electricity coursed through Power Man and the symbiote. The black goop started to drop off him as he wobbled. "Come on, Power Man, that's like static cling to you. Shake it off." The symbiote reformed around him and snarled at Spider-Girl. Grabbing the metal structure, it flung it across the roof. Piper barely managed to dodge, but it went sailing over the edge of the building. Ah, schnitzel. Piper dove after the structure. She shot a few webs at it, tangling it in her webbing and just managing to catch it before it would have squashed MJ and Harry flat. "That's right, kids. Your party favor tonight is not getting squashed into pancakedom. Though I'd appreciate you moving. This thing is really heavy." MJ and Harry ran out of the way and Piper set down the large chunk of metal before scaling the building again. She reached the roof just in time to see Iron Fist lunging at the creature. Has no one heard of a long-distance attack? Iron Fist slammed said fist into Power Man's chest and the symbiote flew off, leaping after Danny. "Great, Iron Fist. Keep it busy. We'll find a way to contain it." But just as she said it, the symbiote caught Danny around his ankle and yanked him down, covering him, starting with his feet.
I can hear its thoughts. They're confused. Spider-Girl, it wants you?
Danny barely managed to finish his sentence before the thing overtook him completely, screeching at Spider-Girl, who was gaping at the creature. Only one problem with that, I was kind of planning on being me for the rest of my life. Piper dodged and shot a web into the creature's eyes. It hissed and slammed its fists at her. She slipped past it, and it hissed again. Then its hand began to glow. Iron Fist punched downward, shaking off the symbiote with a loud cry. "Get out!" The wave of black goop began to head for White Tiger. It was Piper's turn to snarl. "That's it. You're not hurting anyone else on this team. You want me creepy? Come get me." She held out her arms and felt the goop wrap around her. Her vision went black, and she felt darkness closing in on her. Whispers echoed from the darkness. "Never good enough. Public menace. Your fault your uncle died. Everyone you care about dies because of you. Alone forever. Going to lose them too. Weren't good enough to protect Harry. Won't ever be good enough. You will fail no matter what you do. Better off gone." She fell to her knees as the negative emotions overwhelmed her. An unknown voice echoed in her ears. "Distilled aggression. Pure venom." A silent scream fell from her lips as she fell into the blackness. Chapter 18, Patching Things Up. It was almost like floating in an anti-gravity chamber, and yes, Piper did have some experience in one of those. Tony let her play around in the one that permanently resided at Stark Tower, under supervision, though half the time that meant Uncle Bruce, or one of the dummy bots. It was really only different because of the darkness that surrounded her, and the movie that seemed to be playing in front of her. It seemed to be shot with some kind of color mute filter. Everything was distant, and she could almost hear what they were saying, but not quite. They seemed to be in trouble. White Tiger was thrown across the roof, a small radio tower brought down on her legs, pinning her down. Piper wanted to help, but she couldn't seem to move. It was as if her body wasn't hers anymore. Something about a symbiote flickered across the surface of her mind, but then pain spiked. A loud hiss came from somewhere a foot or so above her head. From her mouth? No, that wasn't possible. The pain returned, this time searing across her back. She got slightly dizzy as her perspective shifted rapidly. Nova was still laying on the roof, but he was shooting a beam at her. He'd shot her in the back? She hadn't thought he'd hated her that much. He was still shooting her. Her face was starting to sting, but she seemed to be walking forward into his shot. She didn't remember doing that. She looked down and saw black webs surrounding her. She was completely wrapped in them, trapped in her own head. She tried to struggle as the symbiote picked up Nova and threw him into White Tiger and Power Man. Iron Fist advanced slowly, hands up in a calming gesture. It sounded like he was talking through a tunnel, but she caught what he was saying this time.
I know you're in there, Spider-Girl. Let's talk.
There was a warped, hissing laugh from her mouth, she realized, or at least the mouth of the symbiote.
There is only venom.
Then it lunged, shooting webs out of its wrists. Not her web shooters. She could feel those, the symbiotic webbing pressing them uncomfortably tight to her wrists, blocking their use. Even if she could move, Danny was trapped, stuck to the wall. Venom advanced, teeth bared as if to rip Danny to shreds. Power Man lunged, shoving Venom away from Iron Fist. Venom slammed a fist into Power Man's face, sending him flying. Then it turned and spotted Harry, who seemed to be standing on the edge of the fire escape watching the fight. Venom practically howled and lunged. Piper screamed. Suddenly she could move again. Her legs were still trapped, but she didn't need those to fight. Somehow she pulled her torso out of the symbiote, strands of its black tar-like substance trying to pull her back in. She growled, "That's it, Ugly. I'm not letting you hurt anyone else." Their fight had to have been confusing to watch. Piper fought to get free as the symbiote tried to pull her back in. They battled across the rooftop as the team watched on, unsure if they could help without hurting her. The oily mass of the symbiote reached out and wrapped itself around her hands, rendering her web shooters useless. She struggled and fought, but she could feel the symbiote winning. It's too strong. Can't do this alone. Then she got an idea. It was gonna hurt like hell, but it just might work. Nova, I need my hands. Nova shot a quick blast, freeing her hands. Piper reached both hands away from the symbiote, pointing them towards the other large metal structures on the roof. She could feel herself sinking into the symbiote, but that would, hopefully, make this work even better. She shot lines around both structures, wrapping the webbing around them with a flick of the wrist. You want to be Spider-Girl? You're in for a big shock, Venom. She pushed her wrists back further, activating the electroweb function. Electricity coursed through the metal, through her and back into the metal. Venom let out an inhuman screech and shook as Piper bit her tongue, trying to hold back the scream building in her throat as she convulsed. With nowhere else to go, the electricity poured upward, giving the illusion of a lightning strike. She felt the symbiote give one last shriek more than she heard it, and she let her wrists go slack. The webs retracted, and she fell to her knees, but before she could fall all the way to the roof, someone steadied her. She blinked a few times, clearing the lights from her eyes. It was Nova, though the others weren't far behind. Piper smiled from behind her mask.
Don't tell Fury. That's definitely gonna void the warranty.
Nova snorted out a laugh as Power Man and White Tiger pulled Iron Fist down from the wall, shredding most of his clothes as they went. He was wearing a pair of stylized briefs that matched his costume, and he had a dragon tattoo that matched the insignia on his costume burned into his chest. The team stared. Danny shrugged, smiling under his mask.
It's a monk thing.
Piper laughed slightly. Harry and MJ vaulted over the last few inches between them and the roof. Harry hurried up to the gathered heroes.
Have you seen my friend Piper? We couldn't find her anywhere.
Luke raised an eyebrow.
Rimpy kid.
Sam chipped in.
Spaghetti arms.
Danny held in a grin.
$3 haircut.
Ava wasn't quite as witty, though. Only a 98 average. The others turned to her, eyebrows collectively raised. What? Is that not a jokey insult? Spider-Girl stepped forward, still a touch wobbly on her feet. She's fine. Harry smiled, looking utterly relieved.
Good. She's my best friend.
Piper smiled slightly as the door to the roof burst open and Norman Osborn rushed out, followed by 2 police officers. You destroyed it? For a moment, there was something demented behind Osborn's eyes. But in an instant, it was gone, replaced with the look Piper was used to seeing when she saw Norman. Cool and calculating, but maybe caring. Somewhere deep down. Maybe.
Thank goodness. Get the hero some help.
Piper shook her head, waving off the officers. Norman turned to Harry.
I'm so glad you're all right. You could have been killed. You're lucky Spider-Girl was here.
Harry looked a bit taken aback as his father hugged him lightly.
Yeah, hooray for Spider-Girl.
Piper thought he sounded a touch resentful, but ignored it. There were few people who actually called her a hero, even sarcastically. She nodded to the team before swinging off. She had to make it look like Piper hadn't just been in a fight for her life, for her very identity. She managed to sneak back into the Osborn penthouse without being seen and shut herself in the closet she'd change in. She quickly changed back into her street clothes. For extra measure, she jammed the closet door and began, lightly for her, pounding on it, calling for help. Soon enough, there was an answering call. It was Harry, MJ not far behind him.
Piper, where are you?
Piper hammered on the door, lightly, so she didn't break it. Coat closet? I was running out of the penthouse, but I tripped, fell in here. Then something slammed into the door. Now I can't get it open. It took both Harry and MJ to get the door open. Harry pulled her into a hug.
I was so worried when we couldn't find you.
Piper blushed bright red. MJ smiled until she spotted Piper's hands. There were scratches and several pieces of glass still sticking out of them. She grabbed them with her own, examining the palms. Harry hissed in sympathy. MJ smiled lightly as Norman Osborn cleared his throat behind them. We'll leave you two to talk. The first aid kit is still under the sink in the bathroom? Harry nodded, looking a bit nervous as the girls made their way into the bathroom. It took MJ nearly 20 minutes to clean up Piper's hands completely. She couldn't see the glass that was still hidden under healed skin. Piper could take care of that when MJ left, or when she got home. MJ wrapped her hands and smiled as she headed out to make sure Harry was all right. Piper carefully unwrapped her left hand and grabbed a sterile scalpel out of the kit. She managed to pull out 2 more shards of glass without too much blood getting anywhere. She decided that was all she could do for now and rewrapped her hand. She wrapped the scalpel in extra bandages and slipped it into her bag. No need to bring up uncomfortable questions. She slipped out of the bathroom and back into the living room just in time to see MJ showing Harry how to use the mop.
I knew that.
Piper chuckled lightly. Harry turned to her and smiled slightly. Hey. MJ smiled. Double hey means you two need some time. I'm gonna head home. I hope your hands feel better soon, Piper. Piper nodded and MJ left. There was an awkward silence before both teens spoke at once. I'm sorry. They both blushed and chuckled. Piper picked up a trash bag and began to help Harry pick up the mess left by the party. She was doing it slightly gingerly as the glass still remaining in her hands moved and sliced new wounds into them. Harry grabbed the bag from her.
I got this, but if you'd like to hang out, that'd be cool.
Piper grinned. With you? Always. Piper began to search for the remote. As she turned away, she missed Harry catching a small piece of goop inside an empty bottle. And hey, maybe we can try again. I promise they're good people. Except Sam. Sam's Sam. Harry laughed before turning to face Piper.
You know, why not? What's the harm in making a new friend?